The following morning, Megan came to work with her own game plan. Her clothes revealed more than eyes should see. Dane kept staring, feeling a lot helpless. He was caught many times by Megan. She made eye contact with him a few times, casually letting him know she saw him struggling. A quiet performance, a controlled act of seduction that burned Dane slowly. The game had officially begun. Later that evening, the office gradually emptied. One by one, lights dimmed. Computers shut down. Employees gathered their bags and disappeared into the elevators. But two people remained, Dane and Megan. It was almost as if two restless minds had silently agreed on the same plan. Dane stayed behind in his office, pretending to finish a few documents. Across the floor, Megan remained at her workstation, her fingers moving across the keyboard as though a deadline demanded her attention. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Eventually, the floor was quiet, just the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic far below. Megan stood up, calmly. She walked toward Dane's office. When she stepped inside, she gently closed the door behind her, then she locked it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other. Dane slowly rose from behind his desk. The distance between them disappeared. Their first kiss was slow, careful, almost cautious. But the restraint didn't last long. Hours of silent tension suddenly broke loose all at once. The emotions they had both been suppressing erupted with reckless intensity. Papers slid across the desk. A phone clattered to the floor. Cables shifted as the carefully organized office descended into chaos. For a moment, the professional world they lived in disappeared completely. There was only impulse, only wild desire. It stretched for a couple of minutes. When it was finally over, the room fell into silence again. Dane sat back, breathing slowly. Something inside him felt different, alive again. A feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time had returned. A surge of confidence, energy, and validation that made him feel like a version of himself he thought had disappeared. Across the room, Megan quietly began putting her clothes back on. Dane watched her. Youth radiated from her every feature. She was in the hot girl era of her life, confident, bold, and completely unafraid of what had just happened. Before leaving, she gave him a playful smile. Neither of them said much, but they both understood something important. This was not going to be a one-time mistake, and it wasn't. From that night forward, the affair continued, quietly, dangerously. Sometimes it was hotel rooms across the city. Sometimes it was late nights at Megan's apartment. Other times it was hidden moments in the dark corners of the office, underground parking garage. And while their secret grew deeper, Megan's life suddenly became easier. Work reviews weren't a big deal anymore. Responsibilities seemed lighter. And before long, the intern who had arrived with little experience found herself moving into a permanent role at the tech firm. A promotion that raised more than a few quiet questions, but no one asked them out loud. At home, Dane slowly became a stranger. He was rarely present. Even when he sat in the living room with Vivian and their son, his mind was somewhere else. Sometimes when Vivian asked for intimacy, Dane would casually turn her down. The irony was almost cruel. Months earlier, he had been the one begging for attention. Now he had none left to give. One day he told Vivian he had to travel for work, a business trip to the Bahamas. But it wasn't work, it was Megan and a couple of her girlfriends. The work trip turned into a week-long sinful vacation. There were pool parties under the Caribbean sun, limousine rides through neon-lit streets, 2 long nights dancing in crowded clubs. Alcohol flowed endlessly, boundaries disappeared, and in the middle of all that chaos, Dane and Megan continued their reckless affair. For a week, Dane lived like a man who believed consequences did not exist. But consequences have a way of arriving quietly. 2 weeks after Dane returned home, he checked the mailbox one afternoon. Inside was a plain envelope with his name written across it. He opened it casually. Then his stomach dropped. Inside was a short note. I see what you do, and you need to pay, or I reveal your little secret to your wife. Attached were photos, clear photos. Photos of Dane and Megan kissing in the underground parking garage of their office building. At first, Dane assumed it had to be the building's security guards playing some twisted prank. The next morning, he confronted them, but they looked genuinely confused. They denied everything. A week later, another envelope arrived. This time, the photos were from the Bahamas, poolside, outside a club. Moments that should have remained private and buried. Behind the photos was a location address and a demand. $300,000. Deliver it, or your wife will see everything, and we will also copy your manager at work. Dane paid. He had no choice. But as it often happens with blackmail, the demands didn't stop. They never stop. More envelopes arrived, more threats. Sometimes the letters had Vivian's name written on them, and inside would be the same photos. Dane became obsessed with the mailbox, checking it several times a day, opening every envelope, even ones that weren't addressed to him. The stress consumed him. He lost weight. He barely slept. His mind began to unravel like an addict desperately chasing his next fix. Then the blackmailer gave him another instruction. Meet Megan at an open park in New York. Spend time together. Act natural. Megan didn't want to go. Why a public park? She asked suspiciously, but Dane insisted. Over and over. Eventually, she gave in. They walked through the park together. They laughed. At one point, they briefly kissed on a quiet path. But Megan quickly sensed something was wrong. Dane looked tense, paranoid. She pulled away. "What's going on with you?" she asked. Dane hesitated, then finally said it. "Someone is watching us." Megan froze. "What?" "For weeks now," Dane continued nervously. "Someone's been blackmailing me. They have photos of us." The color drained from Megan's face. Without another word, she turned and rushed out of the park. Dane remained behind, alone, confused, terrified. When he returned to his SUV in the parking lot, something caught his eye. A note under the windshield wiper. He grabbed it with shaking hands. It read, "You have 20 minutes. I've delivered today's photos to your doorstep. Your wife arrives in 25. Terror exploded across Dane's face. He checked his GPS. 30 minutes to get home. He started the engine and drove like a man possessed, speeding through traffic, heart racing, mind collapsing under panic. Then it happened. He lost control of the vehicle. The crash was violent. When Dane finally woke up 3 days later, he was in a hospital room, his arm and legs suspended in heavy casts. The room was silent. No family, no friends, just the distant sounds of hospital machines. A nurse entered the room. Dane looked at her immediately. "Did my wife come to visit?" The nurse hesitated, then shook her head. "We contacted her," she said gently, "but she told us she's the last person you should expect to see around you." Dane slowly nodded. He understood. 2 months passed before Vivian finally walked into the hospital room. She carried an envelope in one hand. Her expression was calm, cold, controlled. She sat beside the bed. "I got the messages," she said quietly. "The photos too, including the ones you tried hiding from me." Dane said nothing. Vivian continued. "I unlocked your phone. I confirmed everything. The affair, the pictures you kept." Silence filled the room. Dane looked at her almost blankly. "So," he asked calmly, "did you bring the divorce papers?" Vivian nodded. "Oh, yes." Then she leaned back slightly. "But before that, you should hear something." She paused. "I did my background check and noticed you've also been blackmailed. You even withdrew money from our joint account several times. So I contacted the police when it all didn't make sense to me." Dane looked up. "They investigated," Vivian continued. "And it turns out your blackmailers were exactly who they should be." She stared directly at him. "The bitch you were sleeping with and her criminal boyfriend." Dane's eyes widened. "Oh, shit." They've been arrested, Vivian said flatly, and dealt with accordingly. The room went quiet again. Vivian looked at him one last time. So, before we meet in court, do you have anything to say? Dane sighed and slowly pushed himself up in the hospital bed. I never cheated in our marriage, he said. Not until I stopped caring, and you know why. Vivian scoffed. Drop the pathetic story, Dane. There are husbands who are not starved at home, and they still cheat. Dane shrugged. Well, that's not me. When you were active, I was faithful. He paused. Not that I blame you, and not that I blame myself. Sometimes it's just a question nobody can answer. Then he added quietly, and there are millions of husbands living the same story, he concluded. As we finish up the story, here's something to think about. Dane says millions of husbands are living the same story, but here's the question no one seems to agree on. Is cheating the result of a broken marriage, or is it simply the decision of a weak man? What do you think? Let us know in the comments.